Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons, what exactly they're doing, trying to figure out and decipher what their plan is moving forward, where they are going from here, and or where they should go from here, because they certainly had an interesting offseason. I've had a couple of thoughts about it already, but now we kind of get to put it all together and talk about the long-term outlook of the Detroit Pistons. But before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every single day, so it's a great place for consistent NBA content. If you enjoy content like this, you can also leave a like rating on the video as well. It helps me out a ton. It lets me know that you're enjoying this so I can make more videos like it, and it helps get the videos out to more people on YouTube as well. And you can hang out with me at various socials that are at the bottom of the screen here, as well as down in the description below in a link tree. But with all those things said, let's go ahead and talk about the Detroit Pistons. So this is a team that I'm sure a lot of people don't really want to talk about, but I'm interested. I'm interested in what the plan is. What's the game plan for the Detroit Pistons? So as we look at their roster for this upcoming season, it's pretty clear that they're not going to be a great team, right? Which is worrisome considering that they have a top 10 payroll in the entire league, currently sitting at $132 million, including some players they recently bought out in Zaire Smith and Dwayne Dedmon down there at the bottom of the screen. So the only scenario in which Detroit is a playoff team or even a borderline playoff team this year is if Blake Griffin is healthy and an all-NBA caliber guy. And that is a really worrisome situation to be in if I'm a Pistons fan, considering the payroll, considering the relatively limited long-term flexibility, and considering the lack of young talent and upside on this roster. That's definitely concerning. I don't imagine Blake at 31 years old, given the injury history that he's had throughout his career, I don't imagine him having some kind of really great season this year. Now, let's walk ourselves through that, though. Let's just say that, for example, you know, Blake has a great year. Derrick Rose is awesome. Some of the young guys, Killian Hayes is really good. Jeremy Grant is really good. And they're like halfway through the year, or a little bit before the trade deadline, they're like the 9th or 10th seed in the East. I would immediately, and I mean immediately, trade Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose to the highest bidder. I would not hesitate. I'm not worried about getting the 8th seed. I'm not worried about getting the 7th seed. I don't care about winning 40 games this year. It's all about the long-term outlook and the future for this group for two reasons. One, in a scenario in which Blake has a really, really good year this year, and there are actually other teams interested in trading for him, with the way that this 2021 free agency thing is shaking out right now, I would want to be on the side of things where I dump Blake Griffin before he opts out this offseason, because I think that is, albeit a limited possibility, still a possibility. You can see as a player option right here. I personally would want to make sure that I get value out of Blake Griffin before I have to be put in the position to potentially pay him long-term and or lose him for nothing. Now, in a scenario in which he's not good, his contract just comes off in the summer 2022, and we're good. But there shouldn't be a scenario in which Detroit just makes the playoffs this year. They should either be really, really bad because Blake is bad because they trade Rose, or they should be okay, but they still don't make the playoffs because they trade Blake Griffin and because they trade Derrick Rose. That should be the only scenario for me this year for Detroit. Now, as we look at the long-term outlook, let's just say that Blake's really good, they trade him, or they keep him and he opts out, or he leaves in 2022. The other options here obviously are to move on from Derrick Rose. I would be shocked if he's still on the roster by the end of the season. You get some kind of assets there. Then things start to look up a little bit for this group. Let's just assume that Blake opts out for the summer 2021. Then you're going into that offseason with a little bit of salary cap space, depending on what the salary cap is set at for that offseason. You're looking at upwards of $30 million in salary cap space in that offseason. You've got Jeremy Grant, you've got Talon Wright, you've got Mason Plumlee, Killian Hayes, Sekou Doumbouya, Sadiq Bey, even if you could talk yourself into Josh Jackson. There's some players on this roster that you could get yourself a little bit excited about. You've got a little bit of cap space there. You use that cap space, ideally, to take on contracts from other teams in exchange for draft picks. You continue to build up that young talent. And then things start to really open up for you in the summer of 2022 when you've got guys like Talon Wright coming off. You've got, at that point, whether Blake opts in or out is irrelevant. His contract will be fully off the books in that summer of 2022. And then you got a big expiring contract of Jeremy Grant as well. And that's really a guy we need to talk about here, because Pistons fans are already kind of turning on Jeremy Grant. I know he had a good game the other night. But for a player like him that kind of chose to go to Detroit over Denver, which is a better, contender, and was offering the same amount of money, but he wanted to go to Detroit because he wanted a bigger offensive role. Pistons fans are nervous that they're not getting what they were hoping they were getting when they paid for Jeremy Grant. They were hoping they were getting the Swiss Army knife defensive player that was going to allow, you know, all these other young guys to develop super well because they could always rely on Jeremy Grant being good defensively and doing all the small things and not taking up any of their, you know, offensive responsibility. But if he's just going to be like this inefficient offensive player that doesn't care as much about defense anymore, that's going to be a huge, huge issue. But if they get to the summer of 2022 and he's still a good, usable player, that $20 million expiring contract could be useful, as could the $8 million for Plumlee. And then you're looking at some things starting to open up here. But if guys like Killian Hayes, if guys like Sekou Naboya, Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, if those guys aren't good, then none of this really matters for Detroit. And that is my biggest issue with this roster. It's not limited cap space flexibility. It's not the bigger contracts of Blake or Jeremy Grant. It's just they don't have anybody to look forward to right now. And I know that people are excited about some of the players that they drafted this year, and they did a good job at least of getting some players, some quantity of young players in this roster, and hopefully Killian Hayes is really good. But they don't have anybody they can truly count on right now. Hopefully by the end of the year, they'll be in a situation where they can count on somebody. Ideally, that person is Killian Hayes. I think it's possible he could be in contention for the Rookie of the Year this year, depending on how everything works out with that awards race. But that's really the big sticking point for me, which is why, again, I would advocate for a scenario in which either they're really bad because Blake is bad, or they're really bad because they traded Blake, they get a top pick, and then they kind of move forward from there, either because Blake opts out because he's not on the roster anymore, or because he'll be a free agent in the summer of 2022. So those are kind of all the options here moving forward for Detroit. The only other thing that I could see them doing, which I would not advocate for, but this is Detroit, and typically they have not shown a willingness to go truly all the way down to the cellar of the NBA standings, is, let's just say Derrick Rose and Blake Griffin are awesome, Jeremy Grant's really good, and they talk themselves into some kind of really weird star trade scenario where I can't even imagine who it would be. But let's just say a big star comes available, right, during this upcoming season, and they're like 25-20, and they're like, oh, we're actually kind of decent. They could look in a scenario in which they trade some of their young players in exchange for a star. Then you've got Rose, insert star here, Jeremy Grant, Blake Griffin, and Mason Plumlee, and you're like the 7th seed in the East, you know, and that accomplishes whatever it does for you. And then you know, Blake probably opts out, you pay him the max, and then you're in a really bad situation long-term because you've got these bigger contracts on the roster. But it's Detroit, and I could always see them doing something like that, which, you know, for me doesn't make a ton of sense, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is not what the Pistons are going to do. So I would be nervous about that particular aspect. If I was a Pistons fan, just I wouldn't have a ton of confidence in this front office based off what they've done in the past, as well as what they did this most recent offseason. I definitely don't agree with a lot of the moves they made, whether that be Plumlee or Jeremy Grant, even though Grant was a player that I was really excited about as a free agent this offseason. I think they definitely didn't value him properly in terms of what they offered him and or the role that he was accepting in order to go to Detroit. If they had made it clear to him, hey, we're not bringing you in to be this great offensive player, we're going to build offensive players around what you do defensively, I'd feel a little bit better about the contract that he's on. But right now it seems like they're not on the same page, which makes me very nervous for the long-term value of this contract, which makes me very nervous for him potentially being a huge, huge overpay in this offseason. So at the end of the day for Detroit, this entire season just hopefully comes down to them progressing and them figuring out a plan moving forward. Hopefully Killian Hayes is awesome. Hopefully some of the other young guys like Naboya look really, really good. And they can go forward from there, and they can build around those guys, and they move on from Blake, they move on from Derrick Rose, and they don't have to pay any of those guys longer-term contracts. And then they've got some flexibility moving forward. They've got some assets in exchange for Rose and Griffin. They can get more assets in that offseason by taking on bad contracts, and you kind of go from there. Hopefully they get some good lottery luck. And that's the ideal scenario, but there's a lot of other really bad scenarios as well that I think could come up, especially considering my lack of confidence in this front office at the moment, which would make me very, very nervous if I was a Pistons fan. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you guys missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. I've been putting out a ton of content lately. I would really appreciate if you guys would check out any of those videos that you did miss. But with that said, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.